Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Go With Your Gut podcast. I am your host, Lauren Dreyer, and today we are talking about the status quo. Now, what do I mean by the status quo? Because whenever I hear that, I can't help but think of Nicolas Cage on National Treasure hurtling down this ancient, I don't know, stairwell and saying, Dad, we need to change the status quo. It's change. We're no longer going on that. Well, yesterday I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about things that run in your family for generations. And maybe your family has a history of um, some illness, you know, cancer or respiratory issues, whatever it is, you have a family history and it's been going on for generations. And, you put it on your medical forms so they know what you have a potentially better chance of getting. You don't have it yet, but you have your genes give you a better chance of getting it because of your family, right? Well, they were relating it to maybe your family has a history of being very judgmental, maybe critical, maybe very negative. Um, or maybe you have a family history of everybody is perfectionists or whatever that may be. Well, then I was submitting a TEDx talk application, and I was talking about helping people get past their limitations of the status quo in life and in whatever they're going through. And I thought, well, those two things kind of relate to each other rather nicely. And so I wanted to talk about what is your status quo? Because one of the other things in the podcast that they talked about is with this, whatever your family has had and been dealing with for so long, maybe you are the one and you can be that change maker. And the way they worded it is whatever this thing is, whether it be a sickness, whether it be addiction, whether it be the judgment, negativity, criticism, perfectionism, whatever it looks like. Because, yes, all those things can get passed down. And you may think, yeah, Lauren, no, judgment, negativity, creative or criticism, and perfection, no, they can't get passed down. But can they, to some extent, if everybody in your family has a tendency and a history of possessing that quality? I would say yes. So, thinking about that, if everybody in your family, generations back, has always said, well, yeah, you know, my family is has always been very critical, or we're just kind of we run negative. That's just kind of how we are. Or, I come from a long line of perfectionists. So naturally, I'm a perfectionist because that's who I grew up with. That's how they taught me. That's what I was always around. So naturally, yes, I tend to be a perfectionist. Well, do you have to be? That would be the question, because yesterday there was a very interesting point of view on that podcast, and it's always ran in your family for generations until it ran into you. And I thought, how very interesting, because it seems like I've talked to people that have said, you know, everybody that I grew up with has always been this, add the descriptive word or whatever. But that's just not who I want to be. And if you if you come from a family that maybe they have a lot of substance abuse addicts or any of this stuff, well, some people in that family might say, I'm not going to touch any of that because I already know that previous generations deal with this, struggle with this, or, maybe it's absolutely ruined their life in some way or another. But do you have to take part in that? No. I know a lot of people who would say, well, my so and so relative was abused this or was an alcoholic or whatever it was. And they'd say, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to touch alcohol because I don't need to, because I don't want to take a chance that that might happen to me. I don't want to take a chance that I might activate that piece of me that is perfectly fine right now. It is dormant, it doesn't affect me. But if I give in to that because of whatever is going on in life, if I give in to that, all of a sudden, my life starts taking a different trajectory. It starts affecting all of the places of my life. So you could relate that to any of those things. If you come from a line of, even in maybe if it's not a bloodline, but the environment that you grow up in was overwhelmingly negative or critical, or um, everybody was still perfectionist, and that kind of got bred into you by nurture, not necessarily the nature, but the nurture piece. And you kind of have that feeling in you saying, well, yeah, I kind of have a tendency to want to do that. So you make efforts to not even go there. So what would happen instead of saying, well, yes, I'm going to accept this because everybody in my family has dealt with this, done this, is dealing with it, and here's what their lives look like. How do I change that? Because you can. It is a choice. And I mean, every one of us has the ability to make our own choices, and then we get to choose to live with those choices and the outcomes. So, what if it came down to whatever was the status quo for your family, whatever everybody in past generations has dealt with, and you say, you know what? It ran into me. It's going to stop with me because I'm going to be the change maker. I'm going to make sure this stops here. Because if you think about it, if whoever in your past, your grandparents, great grandparents, whoever that, whatever that was, whatever that looked like, dealt with any of those issues, then you might say, well, look at me here. I could very much carry that trait on and pass it down to my kids, grandkids, and so on. Or you could say, you know what? I wish this hadn't gotten passed down to me. So I am going to be that change maker. I am going to break the cycle, change the status quo, and I'm going to be the first person that doesn't succumb to this, that doesn't get caught up in that judgment, that doesn't get caught up in um, that negative environment or reacting negatively to a lot of things. Who knows what it is? Or I'm not going to be the person who is overly critical of people if Maybe one or both of your parents are, maybe your grandparents are, because let me tell you, I'm sure you've realized times have changed. And you don't have to follow in that. You don't have to be the same because guess what? You are an individual. So maybe you have a personality that wants to be a perfectionist. And yes, you may come from a long line of perfectionists, and maybe that's a little bit of nature and nurture, could be both. But what could you do to break that cycle, to challenge that status quo, to say, you know what? I've come from a long line of this and I'm done. I don't want to be like that. I don't want to have a, critical nature or be a negative person because it's exhausting. It might be natural, but you know what you can do is change that mindset and start making it natural to be positive or to be realistic or to work your way out of why you are a perfectionist, because that could stem from a lot of different things. And maybe you don't need to. Maybe that's not the person that you want to be. Maybe that's not how you have to be, because it could it could be a part of you, but you don't have to activate it. Or maybe you can deactivate it somehow by changing how you are, who you want to be, and what what you want to be for the future, what you want to be and who you want to be for maybe kids, grandparents, or not grandparents, grandkids, whoever down the line, that the things that you do are then going to pass down to them. It's going to affect them. So maybe if you shift the perspective and think about what has been the status quo in your family for generations and generations, and maybe you just have that gut feeling of, I don't want to be that person. That just doesn't mold well with me. That just doesn't sit with me. And, maybe it's something that you're struggling with, saying, this is kind of who I grew up with, but I don't have to do that. I don't have to be that. Whatever that looks like for you, it could be that long line, but it could run in your family until it ran into you, because you could very well be that change maker and be the one who is supposed to say, yeah, this isn't, I'm going to be the first person to break this cycle. I'm going to be the one that doesn't give in to this. So, whatever that looks like for you, think about how that looked in past generations and how you want it to look going forward, because you do have the power to change that, to decide what you want that to look at and start either working on it or have that reinforcement in your head of, this is why I don't do this. This is why I work so hard to be who I am and to not fall into those patterns. Now, yes, it could be a medical diagnosis and maybe something that you do triggers it. You could be the one to think differently about it, and instead of saying, yeah, it got me and here we are, I guess I'm just going to live with it. How do you work past that and say, you know what? This is where I'm at. This is what I have, but I'm I'm not going to be satisfied with this until I can move past it. So how can you shift your mindset to want to challenge that status quo and move forward and be who you want to be? for whoever you want to be that for. Maybe it's just you, or maybe it's kids down the line. Who knows? Maybe it's a team, maybe it's somebody else in your family. Either way, go with your gut, challenge the status quo, and don't be afraid to challenge what has always been for what you think needs to be now.